Huh? They're going to start talking about item 5 on the agenda. Wait, what's that one? Recommendations to the governments of the countries concerned on both sides. What does that even mean? Yeah, okay, yeah, no, that makes two of us. All right, yeah. February 3rd, 1952. One problem the UN delegation had all through January was that they weren't really able to give the communist side an accurate and complete list of all the POWs they held, though they had promised to give such a list. Thing is, there were over 100,000 people to check out, and even when they had done so, the mimeograph machine had technical issues, so the lists were illegible. UN delegate Ruthven Libby has been pressing 8th Army to give him lists now because the other side keeps asking for them, and it is this week that he gets them and passes them on. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is the Korean War. Last week, there was yet more back and forth at the peace talks about future airfields and POW repatriation. The bombing campaign of the northern transport system continued, the blockading of the northern coast continued, and U.S. President Harry Truman wrote something pretty provocative in his diary. Here's what follows. So, the lists. The UN POW lists, which Libby gets January 28th. They claim 120,720 Chinese and 11,360 Koreans, for a total of 132,080 prisoners in UN custody. This is actually less than the numbers from December 13th, a difference of 394 people, but that is because of some reclassification of POWs to civilian internees. Libby tells his opposite number, Lee Sang-cho, there are 44,000 such reclassified civilians, and he's ready to hand over that list too, with 3 days' notice, when the communists are ready to hand over the data on the 65,000 or so prisoners they hold. Lee ignores that offer. But today, February 3rd, he sure shows signs of willing to resume negotiations about this when he submits a counter-proposal to the UN that meets most of their requirements, except the voluntary repatriation of POWs back to countries of their own choosing. Lee is even willing to promise that none of the POWs they get back will take part in future acts of war. That's the parole issue. And even to allow the Red Cross, along with Chinese and North Korean personnel, to go to their POW camps. But prisoner exchange must still be on an all-for-all basis and not one-for-one. Libby says, okay, let's settle some details then. First off, he wants the parole thing to be less ambiguous, like it should apply only to military personnel and not civilians, and it should apply only to this particular war. The reason for that is a bunch of these guys are professional soldiers, and not being allowed to engage in any acts of war anywhere would deprive them of their livelihood. He suggests that they get the two sides' staff officers together and work out the details, and I imagine we will get Lee's response next week. Last week, it was decided that staff officers were going to meet to try to sort out the details of item 3 on the agenda. Now, it's been a couple months since I went over the various items of the agenda, so I will do it again now to refresh everyone's memory. The revised agenda was agreed upon back on July 26 and contains the following items as written by UN Commander Matt Ridgway to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. 1. Adoption of agenda. 2. Fixing a military demarcation line between both sides so as to establish a demilitarized zone as a basic condition for cessation of hostilities in Korea. 3. Concrete arrangements for the realization of ceasefire and armistice in Korea, including the composition, authority, and functions of a supervising organization for carrying out the terms of a ceasefire and armistice. 4. Arrangements relating to prisoners of war. 5. Recommendations to the governments of the countries concerned on both sides. As those staff officers begin meeting this week to work on item 3, Ridgway and UN Chief Delegate Turner-Joy figure there should also be discussions around item 5, the intentionally vague recommendations to the governments of the countries concerned on both sides. Vague because the U.S. had not wanted to commit itself to political matters outside the scope of a military armistice. In early December, General Ridgway and his staff had drawn up an initial position that hewed closely to the July formula. Each side would recommend to the governments concerned a political conference to discuss appropriate matters left unsolved by the armistice agreement. This was a nice, indefinite proposal that would bind no one. A couple weeks after that, though, President Harry Truman decided that it should mention that Korea should be united under an independent democratic government, and told Ridgway to include that when he presented their position to the communists. And should the communists insist on the withdrawal of all foreign troops from Korea, well, put that in too. Do not, however, make any commitments as to which specific countries should take part in the conference, nor where it should take place or how it should be set up. That's political stuff and should be dealt with after an armistice is signed. Ridgway had no issue with this at the time, but by now he's had some second thoughts. Like, what if the other side tries to put in the names of countries to take part in political talks? What then? Should he just reject them? Or reject all of them except China and North Korea? And since the enemy probably would press for the inclusion of a 90-day time limit for calling the conference, the UN commander felt he could make the UN proposal more palatable to the communists by anticipating this move. The Department of Defense and the Joint Chiefs had no objection to the latter suggestion, but they were still reluctant to have names of countries mentioned in the agreement. If it became necessary, on the other hand, they conceded that the recommendation to take steps at a political level to deal with matters unresolved by the military armistice might be addressed to the specific states concerned. The Soviet Union would be addressed only as a member of the United Nations and not as an individual government. The U.S. position on Item 5 right now is super cautious. The political situation does not look encouraging with regard to an early solution. So they want to move at a crawl and wait for opportunities. They foresee a long and complicated struggle with the communists over the future of Korea and want to remain as flexible as possible with no advance Item 5 commitments. And if it should be that no final arrangement is reached, well, they'd at least have better chances of reaching some form of modus vivendi. Back to the Soviet Union for a minute. I read President Harry Truman's diary entry last week that illustrates pretty well that he feels the Soviets are the major obstacle to peace, and there is at least circumstantial evidence to support this. In early February 1952, the negotiators discussed the composition of the proposed neutral organization that would ensure against armistice violations. The UN command, through the State Department, suggested Norway, Sweden, and Switzerland, each of which agreed to serve. The communists, after proposing that the body be named the Neutral Nations Supervisory Committee, nominated the Soviet Union and two of its satellites, Poland and Czechoslovakia. The communist delegation blandly added, if the Soviet Union could not be nominated as a neutral nation, there would be no neutral nation at all existing in the world. The exasperated Admiral Turner Joy exclaimed, the guns, the aircraft, the tanks, the marine mines, the ammunition, the fuel, the trucks, and the military advice that has been used by communist forces in the Korean War came from the Soviet Union. When my senior liaison officer first established contact with the communists at Keesong, he was held at the point of Russian machine guns, conveyed to the meeting in a Russian jeep. He even offered a bottle of vodka. Turner is astonished, however, when his delegation is instructed to oppose the Soviets as a member of the Commission, not because they have actively supported North Korea in the war, but because the Soviet Union and North Korea share a common border. The Joint Chiefs even tell Ridgway it's not a good idea to say they don't consider the Soviets neutral for the obvious reason, because it would supposedly be difficult to prove. Ridgway complains about this, as you may have guessed, pointing out that not saying the real reason Washington wants to exclude the USSR gives the enemy free rein to make all the propaganda statements they want about the Soviets that he cannot then refute. To make it worse, the communist side even taunts the UN side. Why do you give no logical reason for opposing the great peace-loving USSR as a member of the neutral nations? You give no reason because you have none. You are unable to deny that the USSR is a true neutral in the Korean conflict. Joy, for his part, thinks the communist insistence on including the Soviets is meant as a distraction from other issues and to force UN concessions. But let's be real. Joy, well, everyone on the American side, has no desire at all for the Soviets post-armistice to be able to inspect American military stuff coming into Korea and learn American technological secrets. He says, It is utterly fantastic that any nation would expose its most critical military secrets to the eyes of its enemies. Which is a very good point. But that is what is being insisted upon by the communists. If the Soviets are on the supervisory committee, then they get to supervise. The communist forces are still busy responding to threats from American technological secrets in the field, though. I said last week the UN has been augmenting Operation Strangle using naval aircraft to destroy enemy-held railway track sections, and then immediate and constant surveillance to prevent their reconstruction. And the communists are trying to adapt to this. For starters, they've moved their AA guns to the threatened areas and are starting to do more damage to the attacking planes. The UN response to this is to try flak suppression by having jet planes zoom in to strike the AA concentrations ahead of propeller planes flying in to drop their bombs. As long as photo recon has identified the positions ahead of time, then this is actually really effective. But moving around AA guns is not all the communists are doing. They are overusing and abusing the great manpower reserves they have. The North Korean Railroad Bureau had 3 brigades of 7,700 men each that devoted full time to railroad repair. At each major station, 50 men were assigned to handle the more skilled tasks, and 10-man teams were spaced every 4 miles along the tracks. As soon as a rail walker reported a break, those units swung into action. Local labor was rushed to the scene to refill the holes and rebuild railroads. At night, the experienced crews could move in and restore the ties or rails. The 5th Air Force estimated as many as 500,000 soldiers and civilians were engaged at one time or another in counteracting Strangle. That's the enemy on the ground. The Far East Air Force is at the moment fighting kind of an uphill battle against enemy air power, as we've seen. The UN pilots, well, they still control the skies, but that is not by force of numbers, but by intensity. However, the Air Force, due to lack of resources, a lingering problem that goes all the way back to congressional cuts following the close of World War II, impedes progress. The planes, particularly the nemesis of the MiGs, the Sabre jets, lack spare parts. This jeopardizes entire units. About 45% of the Sabres are out of action. The units are so overextended, they urgently need external tanks, and they are near total exhaustion. Consequently, the planes carry out missions with less fuel than required, and often the planes need to return too early from a mission or face ditching for lack of fuel. All the while, the communists continue to add more MiGs to their arsenal, and still they have the opposite bank of the Yalu as a line of safety where the Sabres dare not go. In the month of January, though, despite the shortages of external tanks and Sabre wings and things like that, depleted UN squadrons still score some victories. 51st Fighter Interceptor Wing shoots down 27 MiG-15s and the 4th Wing 5 more. 51st, though, has the more advanced Sabre F-86E, while the 4th still uses the older F-86A. The newer version features advanced fire control system and flight control. And with that, I shall take my leave of you for this week of the war, with bombings and dogfights and the nebulousness of Item 5. And is Moscow the not-so-secret bad guy that will sabotage peace? And Turner Joy not allowed to say, hey, you can't be on the commission because the North Koreans are fighting this war using your stuff, but has to say that it's because they have a common border. I'm not even really certain how that actually would disqualify them, but it's all stupid anyhow. And if I were the communists, I would totally do what they're doing and say it makes no sense to leave peace-loving Moscow off the committee. I mean, if Joy and co. are not allowed to refute it, what a propaganda coup. Just hand it to them on a platter. But maybe those peace-loving Soviets really are out for a quick settlement of this conflict and a united democratic Korea. Maybe. And so February 1952 has begun. The winter isn't going to last for all that much longer, and I wonder how the war will look when it ends, assuming it's still going on. So check back here each and every week to find out, because I will be here. Thanks to the Time Ghost Army, for it is the army that allows all of this. You too can join the army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. And Ete Mairi, I'm really sorry if I'm butchering your name, but you are the army member of the week here. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.